Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist at Nutrient Ag Solutions, and I want to thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. We're going to start off with kind of a national discussion on temperature, and the first map you've been looking at here looks back from Friday through the weekend at the number of hours spent below freezing. Now, why I want to keep this national at the first is because we need to be talking about some of the trends we've seen in the models that do increase the risk of a later frost in parts of the Great Lakes Basin. Now, I know that's outside of the Carolinas, of course, but the idea here is to understand where we could possibly be putting some risk down on some newly planted crop, especially corn and soybeans. All right. So we did have some patchy frost that got into parts of the eastern Corn Belt on Saturday morning. And I want to kind of discuss with you some of the changes we've been watching. Now, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, the MJO, it got stuck in phase 7 for a while, then popped out into phase 8 over the weekend. And that's actually what's brought in the resurgence of warmth that we're going to see at the beginning of this week. But if the MJO goes over into phases 1 and 2, which it's forecast to do just like this, well, phases 1, 2, and 3 are in the Indian Ocean. And historically, that tends to be correlated with cooler risks east of the Rocky Mountains in the United States. But one of the things we noted in last week's video was that we weren't expecting this to dive way down here at high amplitude. That's where you get far away from the center of the graph. And therefore, the risk of really almost like record-setting cold was minimized based on that one teleconnection. So what we saw was at the end of last week, the jet stream was staying relatively open and flowing. So that means it was more west to east than it was north to south and no major blocks. But I was getting concerned as the week wore on about the presence of this trough. And it was the forecast, the 9-day forecast out for the end of this week. That's what we're talking about now. So here's the forecast evolution from last Thursday through now. And the latest update for this Friday has now deepened this trough. And we have to see what that means in terms of our temperature and precipitation pattern changes. Now, overall, the jet stream still remains unblocked. You see, I'm just kind of following the flow of the atmosphere, but we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate waves kind of surrounding the North Pole. And the more waves that we have, the more they tend to progress east in the flow, which means nothing gets really stuck and persist for a long time. So that's good, but we need to be discussing what these cooler temperatures are going to mean as we move forward. Because last week, the day 5 through 10 forecast, which would take us through the next 5 days, well, it showed this area opening up with some cooler conditions, while you were going to largely hang on to some warmer weather this week. Well, the newest updates look like this, and you notice that there's not much change for you all. I'll tell you when that cooler air is coming in, but it did deepen in this area, and we need to know if that's going to increase our risk of having a frost problem in the eastern part of the Corn Belt. Because we know that the April forecast, especially for me, was a bust. I mean, I had predicted April to be much warmer than it was, and after the very warm start to it, we saw quite a bit of cooler weather. And that map you're looking at here, this is showing you the, by climate district, the April 1st through May 3rd temperature ranks. And we've been cool. Not only has, the Carolinas, I mean, a broad sector here of the United States experienced cooler than the normal April conditions. So thinking about that, let's go look at what these overnight low temperatures are going to do. What we're going to notice is it's going to take a while for the cooler weather to get to us, but this is Monday morning's lows compared to normal. There's Tuesday going into Wednesday and then into Thursday. It won't be until the end of this week till we start to see our overnight lows going back to where they should be for this time of year. But the advancement of that cooler air, well, look what happens by the time we get to Friday morning. We're going to be having overnight lows in the upper 40s, getting into the 50s as you get to the coast. But I'm concerned as we then go into the weekend with the cooler air going back into the 40s here. No, I'm not predicting frost in this area, but possibly in through here. That's an area I'm going to be watching all week. And again, it's just thinking about what happened for the crop that's been planted there, has emerged, and what it could possibly do if this frost has any sort of a duration to it and possibly impacting the quality of that crop. So we're going to watch that. In terms of this Saturday morning's risk from the European ensemble, we do just see that overall in that area, that the risk is not zero. So we start to see the probability of getting a frosty temperature in Wisconsin, Minnesota, northern Minnesota, but Michigan is what I meant to say here, northern Indiana, Ohio. Well, it's not zero. It's getting up there at places over 50%. Now, again, this isn't for us, but we're going to be seeing this cool down. I just wanted to start off today discussing that because we're going to finish with a long-range discussion on temperatures, and we just need to know how the pattern's going to change throughout this week. From there, let's talk about precipitation. Now, this is our last 7 days of precipitation. And a couple of things to take note of. We were dry throughout much of the last week. What ended up happening is we had a stalled out boundary here, producing a lot of flooding rain through the Red River Valley over toward the Ozarks in Missouri. And then this cutoff low got down into Texas, and it just sat here. And it has slowly started to emerge, and now it's moving its way through the Tennessee Valley, and it's going to be the source of some storms today, isolated, but some source of storms today. And then we're going to be seeing possibly another round of it later this week. I'll get to that in just a moment. But overall, our last 2 weeks have been relatively dry for much of North Carolina, Virginia, and pockets of South Carolina. It was very dry from Kansas, Nebraska, through Iowa, northern Illinois, Wisconsin, southern Michigan. And I want to tell you something. The corn crop in this area got planted very fast over the last couple of weeks. Our drought concerns for the northern plains continue, and the west continues to be exceptionally dry. But the cutoff low really beat back on the drought development over Texas. Let's just keep this broad scale here for a moment as I show you this graphic. This would be the April 1st through May 3rd precipitation ranks by climate district. And again, the number represents where you stand on the 129 years worth of data we've got. The West likely just saw its driest April on record, but there are pockets throughout the Corn Belt, the hard red winter wheat belt, and then, of course, getting over to central parts of North Carolina, that showed that this last 33-day time period here has been on the drier side of things. Now, it's not to say we haven't had some wet time periods in there, but these are what the statistics hold. Over the weekend, we saw a lot of severe weather. Let me just blow this up so we can see a little bit better here. On Saturday, as that cutoff low finally moved out of Texas, right here through Mississippi, a bunch of severe storms. And then this ring around it, this arc from parts of the high plains of Colorado, getting into Kansas, Nebraska, all the way through Iowa and Wisconsin, came through and really just ripped things up. Now, this is the latest satellite imagery from this morning. And so as I kind of rock back and forth, you can kind of see this is the sunrise line there. There's a couple of things to take note of. Here's that big cutoff low, and it's what's bringing in the isolated chances for storms for us today. But there's another storm system. It's right here on the back side we're going to watch as well. But take a look at this. Let me take you back overnight. So we're actually going backward in time here. And there goes sunset last night. Now look at this. That upper level low, as it really pulled out of Texas into Arkansas. It lit up Mississippi, but big storms on the backside here. And that is the system that's moving toward us. Now, through early this morning, we can see the scattered showers and storms moving through parts of South Carolina over toward the Appalachian Mountains, and then right here into Virginia as well. But as we just kind of rock this back and forth, get the cursor out of the way there, that's going to be the situation we deal with today. Scattered showers and storms. I'm going to watch again this afternoon. Sorry, let's get back there, right there. I'm going to watch again this afternoon for the risk of some of these to become severe. You can see that over the next 15 days, those regions that have been quite wet, let's just kind of outline it here in the European model. Getting back into parts of the Mid-South, the Tennessee and the Ohio River Valley over the next 10 days, very wet. But what happens over in the Carolinas will ultimately be dependent on each of the lows that comes through the United States, how far to the east they're capable of dragging their cold fronts, okay? So this is what the European model is suggesting. That would be near normal precipitation for North Carolina, a little bit wetter the farther west you go. And this is the GFS. Now, of course, different projection, different color shading, but there's two different models here. And as I make these graphics, I've got most of North Carolina favoring slightly wetter conditions. And the reason why is that the next two systems that go up into the northeast drag their cold fronts through North Carolina, increasing the chances of precipitation. What you do notice, though, is that the wettest locations are to your west. And that's going to be just a critical observation to understand this pattern. Well, speaking of this pattern, it's largely driven by this trough here. The first one got kicked out. It's right there. That's what's bringing, it doesn't look like much, does it? But that's what's bringing in the morning precipitation. We got to watch the one on the backside come flinging out here and what it does later on this week. So here's our severe weather risk today. We do have the chance stretching from Alabama through this section of North Carolina for seeing some of those thunderstorms to become strong to severe. But it's the real severe threat's going to start here, southern Indiana, going through just north of Memphis and then back into the Texas and Oklahoma panhandle. Tomorrow, that frontal boundary starts to slide farther to the east. And by the time we get into Wednesday, we will see this area showing up with the general risk of thunderstorms on that day. Right now, the Storm Prediction Center, that's all they've got for the day on Wednesday, the 5th of May. Okay, high-res modeling first. This was through midday today. So if we just kind of rock back and forth this morning, that was the shower and thunderstorm activity we saw. As we play through this afternoon and this evening, it'll be an isolated thunderstorm threat, but some of these could be severe. I know you're going, well, I don't see it. Well, that's because these models have a difficult time resolving isolated thunderstorm activity. But I'll just tell you, we need to be on the lookout for it here. All right, now we're going into the overnight hours tonight and into tomorrow morning, tomorrow midday, and tomorrow afternoon. Our thunderstorm threat once again increases tomorrow afternoon and evening. You can see that the high-res NAM model is once again thrown in the chances for scattered showers and thunderstorms here, with the main frontal squall line coming through 7 p.m. tomorrow night all the way through the Tennessee Valley back down to Louisiana. What does that get over to us? It does. Could be in the overnight hours on Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, and then we're going to watch for that to pull through on the day on Wednesday. It looks like to be an early morning event. Okay, so that's our near-term forecast. Let's flip over to the European model to see the remainder of this. As we stretch this forward, let's now get out to Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So we've seen this. Notice how the European model really brings in scattered precip early in the day on Wednesday, not a lot of it. And then that front clears out, and then we go into Thursday, and then into Friday, and even into the beginning of our weekend with limited, very limited chances of precipitation. This is 7 a.m. Saturday, by the way. As we then get into the weekend, the European model attempts to develop another low out here in the central United States. But as we work our way through Sunday into Monday, it really just has a difficult time pushing through the higher pressure here. And that's why we see the European model, as I showed you earlier, favoring drier conditions compared to normal across North Carolina. It then sends a front through, but it's going to be next week that possibly comes through, bringing in some scattered precip. So overall, we're not looking at an overly wet regime for North Carolina moving forward. If I show you just total accumulated precipitation, what we notice is, I want to keep this kind of national here, but what we notice is for North Carolina, overall, we're keeping these precipitation amounts down there below an inch. In some locations well below 1/2 of an inch, and much of it being scattered. Whereas over the next 10 days, the probability in this area of getting at least 2 inches of rainfall is better than 70%. It could be very, very wet in that area. For comparison's sake, here's the GFS. And you will notice it is the wetter of the two models for North Carolina. Again, here's the European, and there's the GFS. You say, why? Well, the GFS blows up a much deeper low over Illinois, and it takes that low and pulls it right into the northwest, increasing the rainfall chances here as we get into the end of this week and weekend. That's the only difference. It's the difference in the progression of that low that comes over Illinois. All right, what about week 2? Week 2 jet stream pattern, still largely unblocked. And that trough that was sitting over us, cooling us off, starts to move out by the time we get to, May 10th, 11th, and 12th. And a ridge begins to develop here. That's also the same pattern seen in the European model. And it's this ridge, these higher than normal heights, that seem to be keeping us away from the cooler weather sticking around. Let me show you what I mean. First, precipitation. Let's make sure we get that too. With that ridge in place and the trough sweeping through like this. So again, the ridge is out here. You see how we keep streaming the moisture around the back side of it? That's why when we look out there into week 2, we still see better chances than not of being normal to possibly wetter than normal conditions from the European. What about the GFS? Well, it's got the same look. Do you agree? There is the ECMWF. Here it is. And that's the GFS. Now let's talk about those temperatures, okay? Watch, Monday's highs, upper 70s. Tuesday's highs, getting into the upper 80s, approaching 90. We could get in the low 90s in parts of North Carolina on Tuesday. As we then slide into Wednesday, we're kind of the last stronghold of warmer weather as the cooler air advances. But look at how hot the Central Valley of California is going to be right in through here. Okay, Thursday, that's our cooler day. Extends into Friday. Now that's a day where we could be seeing highs near Raleigh that maybe don't get out of the 60s. But then as we progress through the weekend, there's Saturday, a little bit of a warm-up. Getting into Sunday, we start to see those temperatures recover. And what's going to happen is the northern tier of the United States is going to remain on the cooler side of things going into this pattern. Let me show you what I mean. The day 5 through 10, you see we tend to be under the favor of that ridge. While there's a trough here and an exiting trough there that keeps things cooler across the northern tier of the United States. It's also there in the European. So we can almost draw a line right here where to the south of it, more normal, even above normal temperatures through the next 10 days, through day 5 through 10, and then to the north of it, cooler. How long does it last? Well, let's just stretch this out there. This is the GFS looking out there day 10 through 15. We're still mild. In fact, possibly slightly warmer than normal. And the European sees a very similar pattern. So we're dodging the bullet here on the cooler weather. We just have to deal with a little bit of it at the end of this week. And after that, we tend to favor more mild conditions. How about longer term? Got a couple of longer term things to talk about, then we'll wrap this up. This is now getting out into week 3, which gets us out to the 23rd of May. Again, we tend to favor the above average temperatures out that far. It's a little bit too difficult at this point to pinpoint what the precip is going to be, so I'm going to hold off on that as I watch the pattern evolve beyond the next 10 days. But where I'd like to finish up is let's talk about this pattern right here. Ocean temperature patterns in the Atlantic MDR, main development region. Now, the temperatures cooled off through the month of March and now into April have rebounded back to be above normal. I'm talking about this because this is going to be an area we're going to watch very carefully in terms of the ocean temperature progression throughout this summer. The hotter that becomes, the greater the risk is going to be of more powerful tropical cyclones. You know that we're currently looking at a season that could be about 150% of normal. That's my concern, okay? Maybe 17 named systems this year. The cooler water off the west coast needs to be watched as well, because that could put or increase drought risk in the Midwest. We've been having those discussions, all right? So we need to keep a very, very close eye on that. And one last thing to talk about today, I want to take you quickly to South America. I know I haven't covered much of South America lately in your forecast videos, but if any of you are signed up for my daily reports, you know we talk about it all the time. If you want access to those daily reports, they are free. You can just email me. It's eric.snodgrass@nutrien.com, and I will get you those daily reports. But the point to tell you is that southern Brazil, what I'm circling here is Mato Grosso do Sul, Paraná, this is Sao Paulo, and Santa Catarina. We could make an estimate that about 30%, maybe a little bit more than that, but 30% of the safrinha corn crop is grown here. And they didn't measure much rainfall, if any, throughout the month of April. Now we see that over the next 10 days, it's not only dry there, but also dry in Mato Grosso, which is where the remainder of the safrinha crop is grown, there and then into Brazil's eastern growing areas here. So the problem is going to be that this late planted safrinha crop is not getting the moisture return that it needs. Where's all the moisture? It's on these fronts coming through Argentina where they're trying to harvest a crop. So there's a lot to be watching here in international weather as well. But I'll stop there. Hope you have a great week. I look forward to next Monday where we have all new long-range forecast information to be discussing. So I'll talk to you then. Thanks.